equipped. My background coming into this talk is basically I've been a helicopter pilot in northern Canada for about 15 years, working commercially.
They're recording this session. It's all you can speak.
From speaking in here?
Sorry.
Here it is. Okay, is that okay? Can everyone hear me better?
Yes, much better.
So as I said, I've been flying commercially for about 15 years in northern Canada as a helicopter pilot, which perhaps the space organization brings to it as a person with a lot of operational experience in remote locations. I've worked in the Arctic Islands extensively, the Northwest Territories, and the Yukon, and the mountains. Stayed in camps for 3 or 4 months at a time with a group of people trying to get a job done. And I hope that that background will lend perhaps a different, slightly different perspective perhaps to this whole question of our endeavor to go into space. It may address this question of today's session, why go into space. For the past 8 or 9 years I've been teaching systems analysis at community colleges in Toronto and Calgary. And again, that gives me simply a more hard-nosed or pragmatic approach to things hopefully without pouring too much plastic over the original dream and the original intent. How are the connections here? Is this? Oh, it's still working now? Okay. I've been involved with the Canadian Space Society, which is kind of different from the NSS, although I am an NSS member and have been for years. I helped found that in Toronto in 1983, and we're a going concern and have been going since. Our own group in Toronto put on the ISDC, some of you perhaps were there, the ISDC 94 in Toronto in conjunction with the National Space Society. So that helped lend somewhat of an international perspective to these ISDCs. The question today, in any case in this talk, is why go into space? And my intent was to let my slides lead me through the talk. So hence we're just waiting for the equipment here. Just to look at our efforts today to get off planet and head to, quote, the frontier, just to put that into perspective a little bit, as a people, Homo sapiens and previous, heading from their homelands to other arenas, shall we say, even going back recently in time, maybe as far back as the Vikings, and before that, to some of the sea voyages of the Grecian explorers. Mankind has had, at least in a few of its representative members, that urge within to look over the next hill, to explore, to discover. Perhaps in the past, more for the reasons, as we'll see in some of these slides, of finding new riches, finding new pathways to riches. Wealth and fame certainly were guiding or motivating issues. I think with our own pioneers moving westward 100 to 150 years ago and 200 years ago, encountering all the obstacles they did and the hardships from the East Coast to the West Coast, I don't think wealth and fame were the instigating factors for most who moved west, particularly the families. They were looking for something else. They were leaving for a certain reason, and they took the voyage for a certain reason, and they expected to find certain things. Without going into that in great detail, I think we all know perhaps what some of those reasons were. Some might have been religious prosecution. Some might have been just the opportunity to own their own land and find a new homestead or farmstead. Certainly the gold rush of 1848 in California, 1898 up in the Yukon, these were strong motivating factors. Wealth is so easy to measure as greed is basically one of the big human motivators. And you don't really have to get too psychological and analytical about any of that. That was very plain and very obvious. But when those aren't there, as is the case, I think, with us now, we don't have, in this country, strong religious persecution. We don't have any shortage of land. We don't have any shortage, basically, of work. We have all sorts of places still have to be discovered and occupied. In fact, if we broaden our scope a little bit around the world, I venture to say that most people in this room have not seen many of the features of our own planet that perhaps they might wish to see or could see, let alone talking about exploring the Moon or Mars or further out. So what is our reason actually for going into space? What is that motivator? And that's what the question, that's what the session hopes to address. Okay, let me just try some new magic here and see if something happens. There's a lot of magic. Excuse me. Carry on. Anyways, use our imagination. Okay, I'll use my own slide presentation just to prompt me through this, but if you don't mind using your imagination a little bit, carry on. Just going back into history a little bit, as I had previously, talking about people coming to the New World in the first place, although there's all sorts of groups that did arrive here at various times, to just focus in on the Pilgrims who arrived at Plymouth Rock in the Mayflower. This is around 1620 or so. It was 370 years ago. And look at their motivations for having left their homeland in the first place. I think it's fair to say that there was 78 people on board. I think it's fair to say that it was religious prosecution in that particular case that was the motivator for them to leave and seek this new land. There were a number of things going on in medieval Europe at the time, and amongst which was starvation and disease. And these are also motivators for that group to have left their homelands to seek a new life. It's not exactly that they were seeking wealth out here, I don't think, but certainly they were seeking to escape what they called perpetual serfdom. Okay, they were very much a feudal society back in the 17th century, in this case, the United Kingdom, and to be able to go to a new land in which they were basically free was a very strong motivational factor. Just moving ahead in time, quite a bit in time, up to the mid-1950s. In early 1953, Collier's magazine, in conjunction with Werner von Braun, produced an article, a series of articles actually, on the possibility of humans going into space, building a space station, for instance, going to Mars. These were thoughts that were unheard of back in 1953. And I don't actually have a copy of that issue of the magazine. I wish I had that in my possession. That would be a very wonderful thing. I have gone through the copy. I've seen it somewhere and gone through it. Very marvelous, and everything that he says back then pertains to today as well. We might look at some of his specific concepts as being, oh, that's silly and that's silly. But as a whole, when you look at it, it holds an awful lot of water. It takes a while for us to get into our psyches, the fact that we're allowed to think about some of these things. And certainly in the 1950s, the early 1950s, that was not in anybody's psyche. When I lived in New Jersey in 1957, I was in grade 8, I think, and it was October, and Sputnik went off. Well, it absolutely blew away everyone in our elementary school. It was just the most, it was amazing, but it was devastating at the same time. I think the Soviet Union could have leapt ahead in space technology. And here our school bus went from my house to school every day. We drove by this Nike missile base. You can see these missiles sitting here by the side of the highway, Route 10 in New Jersey. I've been down there lately. I don't know if they're still there, probably not. But here's all this technology in place, and as Werner von Braun's story would illustrate, in 1956 he was basically ready to launch to orbit. But there was a kid in our school who played with these little JetX model engines, and he would launch these toy rockets. And there wasn't really a model rocket industry at that time. And I think, people used to ridicule this kid. They called them rockets. And he put up with it, and he still carried on with his little experiments. I never know what happened to him, but, at that time, there was a source of ridicule. To even think of the subject of rockets or going into space, unthinkable. When someone says to you, do not think of X, in a kind of a subtle way, basically you don't think of it. And in a way I wonder to what extent people are telling us, or what pressures are telling us right now, not to think of Y or X, excuse me, not Y, but X. What is it that we could be thinking of and we're not? So there's frontiers out there. There's some immediate frontiers. Last night I looked out the hotel room window and I saw the moon. Actually, I didn't, I'm kidding. A few days ago I looked and I saw the moon. But the moon is out there. It's a great big disk, sometimes half an angle of degree. You can look at it anytime you want. And of course it was put there to, I'm joking here, it was put there so that we could be reminded all the time that it's not only here that we perhaps belong, but we should be maybe walking around up there as well. It's so obvious. It just sits there waiting for us. Mars may not be so obvious. It's kind of a twinkle in the sky, just like some of the stars are, hardly distinguishable. But again, it's sitting there waiting for us. There had been a survey done a few years back at Harvard, and they polled 500 students as to what the reasons for going into space, so what they considered the reasons for going into space would be. And as I go through some of these, just bear in mind that we're thinking maybe perhaps of two ways of establishing these reasons or motivations. One might be for society or for us as a people or for our country or our government to invest in going into space. And the other might be more personal motivator for you as a person to go into space. So sort of these two areas are going to be overlapping here as we discuss some of these. There were 6 or 7, actually they had something like 15 categories, but I managed to boil it down to 7 categories of interest that made sense to me, so that we could just clearly distinguish between them. First of all, and I'll just mention these quickly and then we'll go through them in a little bit more detail, is the technical returns that could be brought to society from going into space. Now, obviously, this has absolutely nothing to do with you individually going into space. It's more a societal affair. The environment, monitoring the environment. The third point is our origins, attempting to discover the scientific origins. We'll talk about that a bit more. Ideals. It's kind of a nebulous word here, but as we'll see in a few minutes, there's maybe the most important reason. Adventure. They also use the word fun in that survey, but adventure. Improvement of life on Earth. So this is like spin-offs and that sort of thing. Political common ground. I called it political common ground, where we share amongst nations the effort to go into space. Not too many things that nations share in these days, and the space station is an interesting example of cooperation amongst nations to get into space. Now I'm speaking a little bit ideally here. There's a lot of arm twisting and coercion and stuff going on, but nevertheless it is cooperation amongst nations. And finally, the word destiny, which is a philosophical question, but one of strong interest, and some people hang their hat on that. In terms of the technical returns we can get from going into space, of course, the immediate returns from observing the Earth is that we can possibly locate new sources of energy, locate minerals by remote sensing. We can do mapping, we can do surveying, all from orbit.
Sorry about that.
In fact, I think some of you may have read some of the popular press in the recent years that we can even do archaeology from space. In fact, I think some of the major cities in the Mideast of ancient times have been discovered by remote sensing. Communications. Basically now we've got a global network of both voice and data, and of course television, and sometimes we even have pagers that work. We have a global positioning system. GPS is an application that is starting to come into its own. I think we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg there at the moment, but for $1,000 a few years back I could purchase a device that would tell me my location, speed, direction, attitude, and all that stuff, and now I can get it for $99 with twice the features. How this will be implemented or integrated into our society remains to be seen. Some of the technical returns from spin-offs and exploitation of space-related technologies in the medical field, electronics, materials, drugs, certainly, and I think the space station is going to see, through processing up there, it's going to see a lot of that return to us as well. These are all valid reasons why, as a society, we can go into space. Some of the reasons that study gave were straight economic reasons. I mean, there's all sorts of subcontracts given, there's all sorts of engineers being employed, and the circulation of cash within our economy. After all, every penny we spend on space is spent on Earth and given to people.
Sorry about that. It's Paul. I have 5 minutes.
Okay?
We had to run a video.
Apologize.
We had to run a video projection.
From a scientific point of view, certainly in the area of astronomy and cosmology and physics, these are also valid reasons to go into space. We can do a certain amount from Earth, of course, a Mount Palomar situation, and the observatories in Chile and in Hawaii, and the long baseline interferometry that's done from the radio telescopes can tell us a whole lot about space, distant space. But to implement some of these architectures and technologies in space, where there's no air to bother the imagery, and we can have extremely long baselines, will prove over the next 20, 30, 40 years to be able to give us greater insight into formation of galaxies and all of those areas of interest. Yeah.
Question. Was the point of the survey to determine which one of these attributes was the most important? And they have a percentage of...
Yes, they did. Excuse me. My point in looking at the survey was to find out what categories they had. I wasn't too interested in what 500 students wanted to say, to tell you the truth. They have a scale of 1 to 7, and they would put down like 4 for this and 5 point this, and we could tick off the chart and get the results. But it's you know, to just sit down and think up all the reasons why you want to go into space. I figure it's much easier just to take an existing survey, paraphrase it, or put it in a nutshell, and come up with the categories that are more perhaps meaningful to us here.
I'm just wondering if it reflected more of the short-term, immediate types of things you mentioned, or more of the long-term philosophical.
I think it reflected more of the short term, within their lifetime sort of thing. I have a category here called future benefits to be determined, and that's for sure. It's going to take entrepreneurs and people doing a lot of thinking, people letting themselves think about subjects that they hadn't thought of before. In terms of our environment, I think we can list all of the benefits there. Being able to monitor pollution on Earth and take some action, corrective action about that. Perhaps to fabricate and install solar power satellites. I know there was a good session on this yesterday by John Strickland. Space may be perhaps a source of materials we need to eventually come through with nuclear fusion, which hopefully between that and solar power could be our energy savers for the human race. If I can just diverge for a second while I set this up. Back some years, there was several studies done by the UN, and also one done by the Club of Rome called the Limits to Growth. And I did read that in detail, and recalling some of it for this speech, it was interesting because when I first read it, it seemed incredible and wrong. And when I reviewed it again for this speech, it again seemed incredible and wrong. And for those who aren't fully familiar with it, just to summarize it in a nutshell, we've got about 50 or 60 years left as human race on Earth. We're multiplying too fast. By the year 2035, we'll be up to 12.5 billion people. And 100 years from now, we'll be 10 times our current population, which of course is it ludicrous or isn't it ludicrous? I mean, look at the numbers, and that's the way it will be. Right now, the greatest fear is that every person in China is going to want a washer and a dryer and a refrigerator. Manufacturers love that. Oh, great. But, thank you very much. It's one of the spin-offs of the space program. This place. You know, manufacturers would love to take up the opportunity of manufacturing. Where's the power going to come to run all those things? So you can see as population grows, as the third world trends towards being more consumer-oriented, then we are going to run into serious problems. It just so happens that the Chinese have a great source of power, coal. Do they have any pollution controls? No. But that's all right. The wind blows from the west and it blows over the Pacific Ocean east. So the world's going to run into some problems here. The Limits to Growth report basically says we've got 50 to 60 years and there's going to be a giant collapse. And no matter what scenario they ran, that seemed to be the prognosis. Just before I talk about the origins here, I still can't believe the Club of Rome report because it seems so remote. both remote in its facts and remote in its time. And if we look around us, say drive out here in Wisconsin, take a flight from here to Reno, Nevada, at least half the land is totally empty. Take a flight over northern Canada, it's nothing but trees for 1.5 million square miles. I mean, are we going to run out of resources? I can't believe it. I can't believe it. But the numbers are there. So what can I say? So to move on. That point about examining the origins of life, I've stolen a couple of graphics here. Excuse me, Bob Eggleton, the author, or the artist. To be able to discover the origins of the universe, origins of life, these are major questions right now. One of the main reasons we want to go to Mars is to perhaps conclusively determine that life exists on at least one other heavenly body, one planet, that is. All current evidence from micrometeorites and meteors and what's contained in them having landed on Earth, aside for the moment, we have to be on another planet somewhere to determine that life exists. Not only on Earth are we the only ones in the universe or not. I think the answer, again, it's like that Club of Rome thing. It's so distant, so airy-fairy, and so nebulous. I think the answer that I would come up with is yes, of course, but absolutely no evidence. We need evidence. We have to go to the other planets to find that. We're looking for reasons to go into space. That's one reason that'll help us answer these questions. In this case, it's scientific, it's philosophical. Origins of the universe, that's a big bugbear of mine. Ever since that idiot dreamt up this thing called the Big Bang. And convinced a lot of people about that. And excuse me if you disagree with me, but anyways. Talking about ideals, there's a lot of idealistic reasons for going into space. Certainly, mankind likes to face challenges. The Vikings loved to face challenges. Nothing more they liked was to head into the unknown, in the fog, in the storm, and see what they came up with. They did not bad. They came up with Iceland, Greenland, and North America. That's pretty good. Mankind needs a goal and a long-term purpose. Do we have that right now? I don't know. Some of us perhaps do have our own. Mankind as a whole, or our country as a whole, or our social society as a whole, do we have that? We're not quite sure. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. Maybe we can vocalize that, maybe we can't. Certainly a long-term space, again, I hesitate to use the word space program, but a long-term endeavor to explore the frontier, meaning space, could provide that. Again, allowing us to think the unthinkable, think thoughts that, no, we're not supposed to think that. It's not tangible, it's not real enough yet. Don't think that. Don't think you can go to Mars. Don't think you can live on an asteroid. Don't think you can explore the other planets. Don't think we can go to another star. That's not in the federal budget yet. That's not something that your constituents would be concerned with. Okay, we're more concerned with more tangible, mundane, down-to-earth matters. To bring it into perspective, like that kid who shot his school buddies the other day, and all of those types of concerns. Having a long-term endeavor like this in our plans could restore our faith and pride in the human condition. Certainly, some of our environmental monitoring has given us a different perspective on the Earth, and I think the astronauts who went to the moon, particularly Buzz Aldrin and some of the others, came back with a renewed spirit themselves, a new perspective on our planet, and a new feeling of perhaps planet husbandry, where we can manage and take care of our planet as a farmer would take care of his or her farm. And of course, there's the artistic. I think every one of us was amazed. I don't know how many were around then, but when Apollo 8 went around the moon for the first time. I think it was at Christmas time, and we saw those shots of the Earthrise. Tremendous from a nobility and an artistic perspective to think that there's our Earth in the black of space, rather fragile ecosystem that we are in the midst of we're the trees in the midst of the woods. We can't see the woods. There's so many trees around. But from out there, definitely, there it all is in one package. We listed adventure earlier on, and adventure and fun. I think myself that, and I can only speak personally in this case, that adventure is the main motivating factor for me. I discount the science, I discount the returns, I discount the benefits, the art, the nobility. Subtract out all the rest, I don't care. For me personally, it's adventure. It's going into the unknown, finding out what's there, being the first one there, walking, putting your feet on this area of Mars that's never been walked on before by humans, never been seen before by humans. And I say Mars, but that basically covers any and all extraterrestrial territory. As far as going into space as a society, being able to improve life on Earth, certainly the crop predictions done for the farmers has done an immense amount over the last 20 years and becomes better every year. And coming down from Canada, I can say we have this area called Statistics Canada. They do all this satellite information gathering, and they send out information to every single farmer as to what the crops might be best for them to grow in specific over the next year or two, based on what the other farmers are growing and based on the climatology changes. I think El Nino may have thrown a monkey wrench into some of that, but nevertheless the efforts are ongoing, and we do what we can with the existing technology. I think the day has gone when polluters can randomly get away with just about anything. From space monitoring, we can detect through spectroscopy, we can detect all sorts of anomalies or strange things happening where they shouldn't be happening, and action can be taken to prevent that, or at least to correct it. The world, aside from this event in India recently, the world has greatly decreased its concern over nuclear warfare. Nevertheless, our satellite reconnaissance capability is in place to instantly detect any nuclear device activity. And again, these are capabilities from the result of our having gone into space and set up this infrastructure that we didn't have 20 or 30 years ago, even though we had the nuclear threat 20 or 30 years ago. Instant global communication. This is a big cash cow for a number of companies now, and it's the new magic bullet, as it were, for computing, that's for certain. Worldwide data, voice, and video communication at high speed, all done through satellites. And witnessed last week's, again, anomaly, shall we say, for a day with that Galaxy satellite knocked out, I don't know how many pagers, but a terrible number of pagers. And to the extent that we rely on pagers, it did significantly affect our society. Asteroid detection, I only put that in there because of these two movies that are out right now. And I personally would like to see a great big asteroid hit. I think it'd be a lot of fun. Sorry about that. As long as it doesn't land on me, it'll be a lot of fun. Yeah, nothing happens in Alberta, so. So talking about The graphic behind you, of course, most of you can recognize this as some of the artistic renderings done for Gerard K. O'Neill's Space Colonies. And the reason I had this as a couple of backgrounds in these slides is because when he came up with these concepts as a result of some of his classes at MIT in the late 60s and 70s, this was the motivating factor for a lot of people to join and create space societies. Because here was something that was tangible, relatively nearby, very likely doable, and looks like a great place to live and work. So, as far as the political common ground goes, having agreements between nations and joint ventures by nations is a kind of a novel thing. I mean, there are conferences worldwide held all the time that are international conferences, and peers do get together and collaborate and have for a long time, a couple of hundred years now. And I think that will continue, but certainly from a national point of view and from the layperson in each nation connecting with a layperson in another nation, what we're seeing now is the opportunity for some of these activities to take place. And this is relatively new, to go hand in hand with another nation into a risky venture like this. Just thought I'd throw this in. American Congress, the question of destiny, this is very much a philosophical issue and up to you personally for sure. And all I can do at this point is echo a bit of a framework of my own interest here. Yes, we are meant to explore the cosmos. We are meant to be out there. Saying "are meant to" sort of implies that there's a greater power, and that's another issue, of course. But I think this is where we should be going, and the actions that we're doing, certainly in this conference at the grassroots level, are the actions we should be taking, certainly showing ourselves here and being interested in this whole concept. I threw in D&E here. These are the things you're not supposed to think about, so don't think about them. So there are places out there. There's a lot of places out there. Look up at night, and you'll see 3,000 or 4,000 of them on a clear night. Look with a pair of binoculars, and you'll see 12,000 to 15,000 of them if you look in one direction. There's potential out there for the human race. It will all happen. We will go out there. It won't happen tomorrow or 8 years from now. It may not happen in your grandchildren's lifetime. Okay? But it will happen. Actually, it would be interesting to ask you, is there anyone in this room, now I hesitate to put a time frame on it, but let's go wild and say 500 years. Is there anyone in this room who doesn't think, okay, back up one second. First of all, can we all test our arms? Just to make sure they're working? Okay, thank you. Is there anyone in this room who actually seriously thinks that if the human race survives and we get through this club of Rome silly stuff, and we go on another 500 years in some progressive, civilized manner, that we won't be exploring the other planets and living there? I think it's a foregone conclusion. Mind you, we're preaching to the converted here in a way.
I think we may get to the other planets and good stuff here that we're going to other stars and other universes is pure baloney. We don't know the distances and the times to get there or anything else. I'll agree that we have a possibility of going to planets, but no further, I don't think.
Okay. That was going to be my second question, but that's as good as a show of hands. Yeah, well, first of all, other universes, forget that. Other galaxies, perhaps. But that's even pretty far out. Other stars? 500 years is a long time. What's happened in this last century technologically from 1898 to 1998? What's going to happen in the next 100 years? Can any of us predict what will happen?
500 years to get there, and nothing goes faster than the speed of light.
The nearest star is 4.4 light years away. We'll have to go awfully fast to get there. Within a lifetime, I don't know. I have my doubts. Within 100 years, we get out of this solar system. I certainly have my doubts about that. But 500 years, it's hard to say. Other galaxies, I have to agree. Baloney. No, I didn't say that.
Don't think about that.
Don't think. Okay, I won't think about it. Thank you. Here are some of the world indicators. This was done a few years back. I think we passed 6 billion in 1997 or so. So this is just a couple of years back. Number of species that become extinct each day, 104 years until there's insufficient land using a standard meat and potatoes type diet, 8 years. Insufficient land using a southern diet, which I guess is more just than great food, 39. Number of years until 1/3 of all species are lost, 9 years. Number of years until half the crude oil is gone, 3. Well, I guess half of it must be gone because that's been 3 years ago.
If you look at the recent Scientific American article, the classic story about where we are with respect to oil resources. We are right now at the plateau, and the half of the oil that's left in the ground is the expensive half. And so we are at that point.
That's right. I think you'll see on the stock exchange or the financial newspapers, companies now offering going public, in which their main expertise is sideways drilling to get into old oil wells that had been existing. Years until carbon dioxide doubles, 60. I think in terms of some of this, we're basically given a little gap here. We're given it, as a human species, we're given a window, shall we say, of opportunity. About 150 years from about 18-something, 1880 maybe, to maybe 2100 or so, in which we can utilize our non-renewable resources to bring our technology up to a level where we can proceed further. Nothing for us to worry about today, but we should be thinking about it. This is somewhere. This is not a photograph. I wasn't there. I wouldn't mind being there for a while. Just a little snippet from Ulysses. Sometimes the Vikings have been compared to Ulysses' poem in terms of their wanderlust, their sense of adventure, their sense of wanting to discover and settle in lands. This happens to be a Martian sunset, by the way, taken from Viking. There's an interesting feature on Mars. Most of you probably already know this. There's all sorts of volcanoes on Mars. This particular one happens to be, I believe, the largest one. That is the tallest one. It reaches up about 12 miles into the air from the baseline that they've established as Martian sea level. And that's about all we know about it. We probably know just a little bit more about it than nothing. But we want to know a whole lot more about this thing. How did this volcano originate? Is it still active in any sense of the word? It's quite a big volcano, 340 miles across. It's going to take major effort to explore this one feature on that one planet alone. And who will be the team who is charged with carrying this out? Some question about the South Pole on Mars. Is that frozen ice or is it something else? Methane or CO2? Well, we're not exactly sure. There's a good chance it is water, perhaps. And if it's either of the others, these are things we have to know. And how do we know? Well, we have to be there. Actually, we can send robotic sensors, and they can do a certain amount of work. But basically, we need geologists there, or scientists with a pick, whacking into this thing and finding out what it is, how we can utilize it on Mars, perhaps. So, discovering new lands, being the first to overlook that chasm, to see this view. Again, looking at the reasons we go into space, we're talking about this artistic and this nobility issue. Again, a shot from Viking, taken from the ground at night. Anyone for camping overnight on Mars? Or we're not going to camp overnight on Mars. We're going to set up there. So, what is your reason for going into space? And we're looking at all these previous reasons. It could be any one of these reasons. You might have your own reason, which is completely foreign to any of these reasons, that's for certain. They may be a mixture. I think it's more likely it actually is a mixture of some of these reasons we've talked about. All of them might be of great concern to you. And I may have expressed one or two of my own reasons for going into space, but certainly each of us individually can only answer the question for themselves. All I wanted to do was to grab from this survey some of the categories that they were able to specify and put down in a structured manner. So, that's my talk. If there's any questions, I'm here. Yeah.
Well, there's one thing that I think is worth mentioning. You've touched on this obliquely in a number of different ways in your talk, and I think it's worth mentioning sort of a global or a broad issue on this matter of why going to space. In this recent book, Visions, which you may be familiar with, you see it a lot, and you see, book club presentations and so on. Very good book, by the way. And toward the end of the book, he speculates that when we look out into space, and I think by that he means the near neighborhood, between, say, 12 and 100 light years out, we don't see any other technical civilizations as far as we can tell. And he just speculates that perhaps the reason for that is that while planetary formation is fairly common and life, the genesis of life is fairly common, in actual practice, most civilizations don't make it beyond the point where we are now. A planet-only species, a K1 civilization, a Kardashev 1 civilization, or Kardashev 0 rather. We need to go out into space because it gives us another venue. It gives us a robust civilization elsewhere so that if the worst happens and Earth self-destructs, as we've all alluded to in this conference frequently, we will be a robust and somewhat redundant civilization. We will be able to survive that. And I think that really that notion, plus the notion that we humans need time to evolve into a more mature culture. I think you also alluded to that briefly, and I know the previous speaker, John, did too, where he said maturity. We are still the slam bang construction company. We are still, we've made progress in our moral and ethical and spiritual development, certainly during recorded history. If we were to go back to the 14th century, we would readily see the difference between where we are now and where the average human was in those days. But we're still very contentious, and we're still very in a very dangerous position, all the more because we have so much power and so many of us on the planet. So we really do need to go beyond being a planet-only species, and I would submit to you all that in a rather broad sort of way, it's not an immediate goal, but it is perhaps in some sense the ultimate reason for us to be concerned about this.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit, in fact, like the movie, maybe something refreshing on this, where they have pods in space, Bruce Dern is in it.
2001, Space Odyssey.
Where there was a vestige of civilization elsewhere in case the planet was destroyed. Exactly, very valid point. I hesitate in a way to say that human beings are changing much. If we go back 5,000 years or 5,000 BC, take the choice. People there are basically indistinguishable from people today in every respect.
except their cultural software. We're running, the cultural software changes all the time. Really, our worldview, our internal cultural assumptions and so on really are quite different from, say, a Babylonian citizen or somebody in 14th century France. And that's the kind of perspective that you have to get by delving into those things. But truly, there has been cultural evolution. I grant you that biologically and in terms of our biological imperatives and so on, we're still half animal, you know, and all that. But culturally, I think that's important.
I think that's it.
Economics still drives
Question? Sorry. More questions? Yes.
Yeah, just well, I was kind of in line with him as far as I'm absolutely an advocate in the long term for space, but you have to somehow get the people who are not converted into you have to be able to prove to them that there's a real world, physical, concrete way of productivity being increased. Their life is going to be better physically right now in the short term to get the long term gains. And right now, I don't see a lot of that type of development going on as far as short-term capitalism being able to fund longer-term growth.
Yeah, this is why, in a way, we have to sort of mix all these reasons for going into space, from the societal gains, maybe the economic imperative and the tangible, immediately visible return on investment sort of look, and the dream, the vision. There's a mixture in each one of us, of course. Regarding that, personally, I have absolutely no interest whatsoever in communication satellites. Everyone can fall in the sky tomorrow, or they put up another 10,000. Not do I care. It's enough into space. However, if we look careful here, whether you're a space advocate saying that sort of thing to non-space advocates, because it's kind of all bundled as one thing in space. Yeah.
Paul, what you're saying there, we had talked before, you and I, the environmental issues that you're bringing up, there's almost got to be a marriage between the environmental community and the space community, which has been adversarial, okay? Don't go into space, save the planet. I think if that happens, I think you're going to see a shift from governmental type things to start to move in that direction, which you've been pointing at. Until that happens, I think people are awakening has to happen there. My own opinion. But
I think as space advocates, sometimes we forge forward, and sometimes we step in doggy do, and we keep forging forward across the carpet. And we have to watch that. Certainly, in terms of the environmental, I mean, actually, to be interested in space is to be interested in the environment. I don't think many environmentalists understand that. There's a care there that we have. Maybe our approach, our perspective is still somewhat different. But nevertheless, that care is there. I don't think you'll find almost any space enthusiast who is, shall we say, either non or anti-environmentalist. And if we just stop and think about this for a second before we go charging through the China shop, we won't be fouling our own nest. Sorry for all these stuff.
Just to go back to that point, one of the problems is having many friends who are part of the hardcore environmental movement. One of the problems is that their ideology is not only anti-progress, it is also anti-technology, because they see technology as being inherent. They see technology as being inherent in destruction of the earth. And I think one of the problems that people have to communicate with them is communicating that there's such things as remedial technology. And solar powered satellite would be a remedial technology, would be great technology, not to deal with problems of other technologies.
Yeah, are we up to convert environmentalists? No, I don't know. Yeah, your point is well taken. There's benign technologies, there are assistant technologies, there are big diesel trucks going through your city trying to steal technology, spewing that black stuff. And I'm all for trucks transporting stuff, but we have to focus on the bad parts and the good parts. I think if we can can differentiate between those and take action, appropriate action. That's what you're saying. Is there any questions? Yes.
Paul, do you think there's any kind of danger in our technologies getting so advanced? I'm specifically thinking of robotic technologies or virtual reality technologies, whereby we would lose this sense of adventure of going there ourselves. If we can experience it virtually in our basement, climbing Olympus Mons, for example.
Yes, I do think there's a danger to that. I do think there's a danger. I think it takes a definite proactive stance within their own minds to take action, and the decision to take action, and the decision to think, and the decision to dream. You know, to decide to dream, to decide to think are things that we have to do ourselves. And yes, those are some of those plastic technologies that get poured over and cover that core rock of that dream, of that inner vision that we have. And it's like a drug. It can easily be like a drug, the virtual reality. I mean, right now it probably isn't. It's a little bit crude. Give it 10 years, give it 20 years, and we're going to talk about virtual reality that's such a siren that we're going to be drawn to it like a magnet, and that is something that is of concern, yes. We have to be proactive in our communication.
Okay.